Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast presented by Bee Culture. Beekeeping Today podcast is your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment. I'm Jeff Ott.
I'm Kim Flottam.
And I'm Kirsten Trainer.
Today's sponsor is Global Patties. They're a family-operated business that manufactures protein supplement patties for honeybees. It's a good time to think about honeybee nutrition. Feeding your hive's protein supplement patties will ensure that they produce strong and healthy colonies by increasing brood production and overall honey flow. Global offers a variety of standard patties as well as custom patties to meet your needs. No matter where you are, Global is ready to serve you. Visit them today at www.globalpatties.com.
Hey, thanks a lot, Sherry. We really appreciate our sponsor support. They make all of this happen and provide us the ability to expand and grow as you will see in the coming months. And with that, thanks to Bee Culture Magazine for continuing their presenting sponsorship of this podcast. Bee Culture has been the magazine for American beekeeping since 1873. Subscribe to Bee Culture today. And while you're there, check out Bee Culture's Beekeeping Your First 3 Years, a quarterly magazine for beginning beekeepers. We also want to thank 2 Million Blossoms as sponsor of this episode. 2 Million Blossoms is a quarterly magazine dedicated to protecting all pollinators. Learn more in our Season 2, Episode 9 podcast with editor and our guest co-host today, Kirsten Trainer, and from visiting www.2millionblossoms.com, and that is with a number 2. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining us. We're glad you're here because we've got a big episode for you today, but more on that in a minute. Hey, Kim. Hey, Kirsten.
Hey, Jeff. How you doing?
Hi, Jeff. How are you doing?
Just wonderful sitting here in the rain in Olympia, but that's normal this time of year. Speaking of this time of year, what should beekeepers be doing?
Depends on where you're located. So Arizona, I heard through a conversation, had 97 degrees the other day.
Wow.
So you want to be making sure your bees still have access to water.
Yeah.
I'm in Berlin, Germany, and it's starting to get cold. We haven't had a hard frost yet, but as soon as we have a hard frost, 2 weeks after that, colonies are usually broodless, and it's a perfect time to treat with an oxalic acid dribble method, since that does not penetrate the brood nest.
Very good.
Oh, 2 weeks after a hard frost. I don't think I don't know how long it goes after a hard frost before we go broodless here. I've always been ahead of that curve, so I have not looked until much later when you get a warm spot in late November. But this year is just way weird here. It's going to be 70 degrees today. This is 4 days after the election, and I'm going outside in t-shirts and shorts. It's crazy.
Here in Olympia last year, I had the sensors on the hive, and I had one colony that was keeping at brood temperature all through the winter. It was it just never really gets below freezing for very long. So I don't know. It's different everywhere.
Yeah. So this is advice from a master beekeeper from when I was in Germany. And if you have that tomato killing frost, usually within 2 weeks, they will have finished rearing out all the older brood and they'll have cannibalized any open larvae. And so there's often a very short window, 2 weeks after your first hard frost, to treat. After that, the bees will start brooding up again if your weather warms back up. I found that when I was running the colonies in Maryland, this was quite effective for my full-size colonies, but did not work for my 5-frame nukes story over story that I was keeping through the winter. They seem to keep the temperature of their brood nests slightly different and don't respond to a frost the same way. I never could figure out why, and that's an anecdotal story just from my own experience in my apiary.
Wow. Okay, you look like you want to respond to that. Anything?
No. How's that?
No, that works.
I'm not sure I've ever silenced Kim before, so.
I find what you just said interesting. I've never noticed that, but I haven't looked either. I haven't intentionally, but I'm going to have to do that this year. Go look at hard frost. We haven't had a hard frost yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of places haven't had that hard frost. They've had a light frost. You really need that first hard frost that kills your tomato plants and ruins any tomatoes you still had on them.
I harvested tomatoes yesterday, so we're not...
Well, I hope you stick them in a brown bag or enjoy fried green tomatoes.
I ate them all.
Oh, wow.
Hey, Kirsten, you recently talked with a beekeeper from Southern Oregon who was impacted by this summer's devastating fires.
That's correct. I had actually reached out to about 5 women who were all in the Phoenix and Talent area of Oregon. And Sharon very kindly agreed to speak with me. She actually lost her home in the fires and the bees that she had at her home. Another apiary that she had at a fire department, at a fire station, survived. And it was gut-wrenching to talk with her and learn about what that experience was, watching your hometown just go up in flames.
I can't imagine having to do that.
Well,
It's just beyond imagination.
So, yeah, and the connection kept going in and out a little bit. She was talking with me from a hotel room where she's currently living. And so that's of course unfortunate. I think I would have been bawling if I'd had to talk about watching everything go up in flames. And I was just amazed by her stoicism and her upbeat perspective on how life will go on. So kudos to her.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks a lot, Kirsten. And we apologize in advance for any of the sound quality issues you may hear during the interview. And before we get to it, let's hear from our latest supporters, Strong Microbials.
Hello, beekeepers. Your honeybees face a lot of challenges out there. Unbalanced food sources from monoculture crops, holding yards, drought, food shortages, antibiotics, pesticides, and pathogens like chalk brood. To overcome these challenges, your bees need the multiple bacteria that are in all nectars, pollens, and the environment. These bacteria aid honeybees' digestion and improve your honeybees' response and resilience to pesticides. Now you can help improve your honey colony health with a quick, easy, and safe-to-use product. Strong Microbials Super DFM Honeybee uses naturally occurring bacteria to restore the healthy gut biome of your honeybees. Check them out today at www.strongmicrobials.com.
Today, I welcome Sharon Schmidt to the show. She is the president and founder of Cascade Girl. Her home in Phoenix, Oregon, was lost to the recent Alameda fires, as were the honeybee colonies she kept there. But her out apiary and bees at the Jackson County Firehouse 5 survived. I just want to express my heartfelt sorrow at the losses you've sustained, and thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you, Kirsten. I appreciate being here.
So many of our listeners have heard of the devastating fires that burned through your hometown of Phoenix, Oregon, and neighboring Talent, Oregon. Talent became the second bee city USA, and Phoenix, Oregon, the 9th. So this area has an active community interested in protecting pollinators. How long have you lived in Oregon?
I've lived in Oregon for the past 20 years, and during that time I taught at OHSU and taught and have been involved in healthcare for the last 45 years. I've been a beekeeper over the last 5 years. And so during that time, I just got my Master Beekeeper certificate from Montana.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, I'm really delighted about that. So the timing of the fire was terrible in so many ways. And it was, in my case, I was able to at least finish my course. So you have to look at the bright side.
And I'm sure that can be very difficult and overwhelming at times. And then I'm sure at other times, the generosity and the good things that have managed to come through are what move you forward from day to day. So can you describe a little bit what Phoenix, Oregon looked like prior to the fires? And I understand it's a very engaged community.
Yes, it was an engaged community to an extent. And we are in a valley. The valley is kind of, if you go up I-5 from California, you drive through the area, and the Cascades are just beautiful. The mountains are green and lovely, and a lot of people live here because they want this kind of experience. They want to be able to go to the mountains. They want to live close to the coast. It's a totally breathtaking area. So Phoenix is located, it's the third town up. First is Ashland, then Talent, and then Phoenix, then Medford. So it's a bedroom community of Medford, and we were the 9th bee city, USA. We had been working on our park for a long time, putting in a pollinator garden, helping people become certified with Bee City USA, so that they planted native species, avoided neonicotinoids, and became knowledgeable about what to plant and how much to plant. And it felt like that was really getting off the ground. We had already created a 2,000 square foot mural in the city of Phoenix, which still is there because it's painted on something that's non-flammable.
Okay.
We had, I'll have to send you something, a connection for that in the show notes too, because it really is quite beautiful. And
I would love to see that.
I felt like we had opened the dialogue for residents of Phoenix to talk about their environmental concerns. And that was probably the best part, was that people felt free to start coming to meetings and talking about that and discussing what they would like to see. And, this was very new for Phoenix, actually. So it's taken 5 years. And during that time, I feel like we made so much significant progress. So residents of Phoenix, I should first say that during this really tragic fire, we had a destruction of about 2,600, I want to say, structures all across the valley. So it's huge. And flyovers will show you that I'll send you a link to that as well. So what we had primarily a lot of were little parks where people had mobile homes. And a lot of folks were just stable. The mobile homes were beautiful. They were in beautiful parks. And, people had a sense of community and dignity there. When these fires went through, it was really devastating because those homes are completely gone. And when I say completely gone, I mean burned to the ground, as was my home. So in our community, there's been tremendous loss. We're still kind of trying to track where people are. People are still trying to get stabilized housing.
I'm sure a lot of people have been suddenly rendered homeless, and that must be very difficult. And where do you go under circumstances like that?
Right. And so, you can talk about this from a community preparedness aspect, as well as you can speak about it from an environmental aspect. And I think that the sad truth is that many of us thought that we were more prepared than we actually were.
Well, and I mean, something like this can spring up quite quickly. You yourself were not home when this fire started, but were visiting a friend. So can you describe from your own personal experience what it was, how the fires unfolded for you?
Yes, I was called by a friend that morning who was in hospice, and I went over to see her. And during that time, that hour and a half or so, the cloud started to, billowing clouds of black smoke started to appear. And I got a call from a friend who had a farm to the south of me. And she said that the farm was on fire and that they were putting it out and that firemen had indeed arrived and so on and so forth. And of course, that was very scary to me because my house was only 7 miles to the north. So I headed back toward my home and was stopped in the middle of town by the police chief and the mayor, who said, "Nope, you're not going that way. Here's your choice over there." And it's funny that what happens in your mind at that time, because you believe, or at least in my case, I believe that these fires would be put out pretty rapidly. Although I could see a building burning to my left, I said, well, I've really got to get through because I have some things I have to get from the house. And they said, nope, you're definitely not going there. So what you believe might happen in terms of what I believed would happen was that the firemen would be able to put it out. And the truth of the matter was that it spread so quickly and that there was such a we actually lacked water. So there was no water pressure for the firemen to use. And I'm still not sure exactly why that was. Some firemen thought that it was due to malfunction of one of the pumping stations. Other people thought that it was because too many people were trying to run the water at the same time and defend their homes. So I'm still not sure why all that happened. But by the time night rolled around, I really didn't know what to do with myself. Strangely, what I had in my truck was my dog and my beekeeping equipment. So I had a honey spinner in the truck along with my bee suits and all sorts of tools. And that's pretty much what I came away from the fire with, was the clothes on my back and these beekeeping tools. So about 3:00 in the morning, I had headed over to watch the fire consume our city. So I was on a ridge watching this huge blaze that I thought any minute somebody was going to put out. And then there were explosions, and the explosions were probably transformers. We had some gas storage areas there, and I was just praying that it wouldn't blow up. But as the red glow of those embers and all of that fire, just permeated the night, the smell that came up from that burn was just horrible. And you knew that, that was one of the signals to me that this fire was completely out of control and that it was not going to get fixed very rapidly. So, I think one of the great things about the internet is that you can find out what's going on. And there was a fellow who actually rode his bicycle down Main Street through the town.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And put that on the internet so that we could see what was going on. And I was really grateful that he did that, because when I looked at it, I looked up, obviously, for my house, which was in flames. And at that point, I knew that, I could prepare myself. Let's put it like that. Right. But I could also prepare myself for the eventuality that I wasn't going to have anywhere to go. So I ended up eventually at the airport, because I thought that maybe they wouldn't let the airport burn down. And I stayed there for a while, went further north to avoid fire, got a hotel, and finally got some sleep. But nobody knew what to do at that point in time. Nobody knew if the fires were going to continue or if they were going to be put out. And it seemed like every time you turned around, you heard a report of a new fire. So you might be headed in one direction, but that direction might turn out to be lethal and you would get rerouted. So there was this whole issue with all of the roads being clogged, and people were desperate to get out of there.
I'm sure. And I mean, during a situation like that, it must be awfully chaotic. Nobody really knows what's going on in other areas. And as you had mentioned previously, the wind was just whipping things up. And so fires can jump very rapidly. And so who were you in touch with? What were you, you had your dog with you and you were in a hotel. So you yourself were in somewhat safe circumstances, although you never knew if the fires were going to be engulfing where you were. Were you in touch with family or friends?
Yes, I was constantly in touch with family and friends. And I was amazed at how many people called me and offered a place to live, clothing, financial support. It was just amazing. People reached out to me personally in a way that I've never before experienced. And everybody seemed to understand the intensity of the experience and was as horrified as I was too. As I said, having had a background in healthcare, I think does somehow prepare you to try to deal with emergencies without falling apart. So during the first several days, I was pretty calm and structured and prioritized the things that I needed to do. But then I was very fortunate because I wasn't one of those people who had to flee from their home. Residents in this valley, many of them got maybe 4 minutes of notice that they had to leave their home. And people who lived next door to me left without their shoes because the police knocked on the, you have to leave here now. But what was confusing to everybody was that I think everyone was expecting that somehow a siren would go off, or somebody would come to their door way ahead of time, or they would see something on TV, or there would be an announcement on the radio that it was time to evacuate. There was no warning system.
That must have been overwhelming for residents to not know what's going on and then to have to instantly flee.
Right. And so that's why I think we're seeing a lot of people who are experiencing acute stress reactions and post-traumatic stress disorder probably at this point in time, or at least they're reporting symptoms like that, because how do you not have that happen?
Right.
So meanwhile, I've been calling people in talent and saying, are you evacuating? Are you evacuating? To just jump back. And some people said, no, we haven't been given an order to evacuate. So people were taking very seriously the idea of not clogging up the roads. However, due to the gravity of the situation in this just massive fire experience, there was no way that they were going to get an evacuation order. We were lucky in this valley that only 3 people perished. And it's due to the actions of the first responders, who largely had no water and oftentimes no manpower, because all of that manpower was distributed throughout the state. And if you take a look at a map to see where the fires were at that time and how many there were, and it's just astonishing. The entire map was covered with little red icons to show you where the fires were. So, so just distributing people must have been a terrible. They had to make terrible decisions, and as our mayor and police chief said, firemen had to make some decisions about what they were going to save and what they weren't. For my part, I was really hoping that it hadn't reached my bees, but of course it did. And I used blocks for each hive. And what's available now is just the blocks. I mean, there's nothing on those blocks. Had we known ahead of time, we would have taken the bees to a different city. But you just never know if you're moving to an area of greater or lesser destruction. And that's, the issue here is that we have a tinderbox and climate change. And the Santa Ana winds whipped through as well. And some people said that there were some people who were setting fires on purpose, although I'm not completely sure of that. But we had the perfect storm, but it's a storm that's all over the state. And it's now occurring in Colorado. So that's the next place where Boulder is burning up.
Yeah, I think a lot of people I've spoken to have said that these fires have really been the wake-up call that climate change is not something that's in the future, but something we're dealing with right now. And it's been quite the galvanizing force of recognition that we're going to be fighting more and more fires. And this is going to become a norm for a lot of communities.
Yes, and we can look at it from the prevention, as well as the notification, as well as the environmental perspective. And my feeling about it now is that we had better look at it from the environmental perspective and see what it is that we can do to change practices, our land use practices, to change the way in which we farm, to examine how we can regenerate the earth. And, I could just go off into a long rant about how we're using topsoil, losing topsoil every year, and I'll refrain from doing that. But I want to say this is not the first time that we've been through a climate change, because if you look back to the 30s in the Dust Bowl, it was a very, very serious experience where it didn't rain for years. And, this goes back to a long way to the book I don't know if anybody's ever heard of this, but there's a book called Plowman's Folly. And that was written in the 40s, and it really addressed how we treat the land. I don't think that the Dust Bowl was accidental, nor do I think that this is accidental. So it's my heartfelt hope that people will be able to see a different way, and that we will present that to them in a cogent and meaningful manner so that they can do something that will save the earth for our kids.
Yes, I think the idea of changing how we farm is very critical to a lot of people, so that future generations can benefit from the land as well.
Better Bee is pleased to present the Pollinator Week series of interviews on Beekeeping Today podcast. As a supplier to the nation's beekeepers for over 40 years, Better Bee provides the tools, equipment, and information you need to succeed. Through its many beekeeping employees, Better Bee serves you with solutions to your beekeeping challenges. That's why they can say they are your partners in better beekeeping. Thanks to Better Bee for their informative catalog, website, supportive beekeeper education, and for supporting this week's episodes. Be sure to see the latest at betterbee.com.
I understand that the day after the fires, you were allowed back in because some of your livestock, some of your bees were still alive. What was that like driving back in?
Horrifying. Just traumatizing, horrifying. Seeing how many structures were there previous day and were missing subsequently. Even the bank burned to the ground, leaving only a bank of safety deposit boxes, which I had one there and it couldn't be touched for like 10 days. And when I finally got to it, it was still warm.
Wow.
And that was encased in concrete. And, it was just shocking to me that it was still warm to the touch. So driving through was pretty impactful. I mean, it was like you couldn't not look and you didn't want to look all at the same time. So what I saw was building after building that had burned to the ground, melted, gone up in smoke, pieces of iron that were left, gray sky, minimal visibility. I didn't really know what to expect about those bees, but I had put them at the fire station, hoping that if there was a fire that they would be defended. And fortunately, the firemen did come to the defense of the hives that were there, and we got those bees out. I was really happy to see them moving and actually foraging, which was really strange because generally bees are not very interested in flying if there's smoke, because it interferes with the polarized light that they use to navigate. These bees were foraging and bringing in pollen.
It must have been amazing to see a sign of life after so much destruction.
It was. It was. The firemen came out and spent a little time with me, and we took some pictures with the bees, and everybody sort of congratulated each other that they were still alive, and we were all very happy.
I'm sure the small win was very important to those firemen after all they had faced.
I think so too. And it was certainly very important to us. So I cried, of course, to see them, because it was just everything. It was a sign of life in this horrible, gray, burned out landscape, that these bees were going about their job just as though it was a regular day. So it still makes me cry, that they were so, that they're so dedicated to their task, that they trust their environment, that they want to take care of their babies and their hive.
I think keeping bees is very healing and keeps us very much in touch with nature. So I can imagine the joy of seeing them having survived and the symbolic meaning of them sort of rising from the ashes.
Absolutely. And of course, while I was there, I was kind of keeping an eye on the landscape to see if I saw any other types of pollinators, and I really didn't on that day. Most of the native pollinators make their hives or make their nests about 4 inches below the ground, and about a third nest in twigs and are above ground. And so I was just like, oh my gosh, are we going to see anybody emerge from some of these? I know where some of these holes are. So I was looking see anything. And I don't know quite what to make of that, because even at very high temperatures, 4 inches or 5 inches below the ground, might mean
Often
survival.
protected.
Mhm.
Right.
But this fire went on for so long, you have to wonder. So I don't know exactly what this is going to do to or for our native bees. We moved our beehives out to an area where there was less contamination, pretty much immediate. And they seem to be happy at their new home. We hope that they make it, but I think already we're seeing reports from California that large apiaries are having a lot of difficulty. And what does that do? Probably problems with forage availability for certain, probably difficulty with respiration, I would guess. I think that there are a lot of reasons that those hives are going to be impacted. And so I don't know what kind of a year this will be for bee farmers.
Right.
Who might not have harvested yet. I really don't know if they did. They probably did it early enough that they had a decent year. But for next year, it could be really hard.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know how much acreage was lost, but I'm sure that was a lot of plant networks that are very important for forage. And then just the large amounts of ash also impacting photosynthesis and nectar production. So it's going to be quite the slog, and we really won't know for years probably the long-term impacts of the fires. What to you has been most surprising in the aftermath of the fires, both good and bad?
Trees blooming. That has been really surprising to me.
Wow. Are they blooming at the wrong time of the year, or is it? Yeah.
No, I was told that it's a fire response, and we are seeing some new plant growth in some of the fields that have been burned. So it does seem to be something that trees will do after a burn, and it's a kind of a facilitative response to the trauma. So I'm waiting to see how that will go.
Maybe it's also a response to get seeds in the barren ground as quickly as possible.
That's one of the things that people have been talking about here, is that people's seeds burned up. We had a wonderful pollinator garden that we had created at Blue Heron Park in Phoenix, and unfortunately that's completely gone. We were planning to take seeds from that garden and, of course, to tend that garden, bring the existing plants along, and it looks like it's not going to be possible. So we will be out there in spring replanting as best we can, hopefully using native plants.
And what are your plans then for the winter? Are you staying with family, friends? Where are you currently calling home?
Well, that's a good question as to what will happen in the long run. A lot of us, I think, are waiting to see what the cleanup looks like. FEMA has come to the area to do the cleanup. There has been no extra housing provided, but various organizations, community organizations, are providing means for people to be in some hotels. And I happen to be in one right now. My choices were limited because of my dog, and he's not exactly the most easygoing terrier in the world.
I'm sure you're very glad you have him, though.
Yes, I am. But when people said, come live here, it was like, are you sure you want Norman too? Because here's what he's like. So,
terriers are high energy and they don't like small spaces.
Yep. So he's enjoying himself here, but he's not interested in sharing his person with anybody else. So that's been one of the mitigating factors. And the other mitigating factor, quite honestly, is COVID, because we're all trying to socially distance, and it's a difficult thing to do if you're in the same household with people.
Well, and I imagine it's a time where normally people would come together to support one another, and it must feel very different when you also have to be aware of potential disease transmission, and so it adds another layer of the whole grieving, rebuilding process that must be very difficult for a lot of people to process. As you mentioned before, you come from healthcare and you have a greater awareness of these issues, but I'm sure for a lot of people it's quite the shock.
people in our area, many of them didn't have lots of resources. So I'm still unsure where a lot of people have gone to. At the very first, they were housing folks at the Jackson County Expo, which is basically our fairgrounds.
Okay.
And people were allowed to camp there. And then at a certain point, they stopped doing that. Now, what exactly happened to those folks is not clear to anybody. And that has really distressed me personally. And I know a lot of people are kind of like, okay, where did all those people go who were kind of just balanced on the edge?
And for any of our listeners who've heard this and feel impacted, is there any way they can help the community?
Some people have started GoFundMes. There are some community GoFundMes. Presently, there's been a great deal of effort on the part of FEMA, as well as some of the churches. Just let me say, FEMA has been here and interviewed people, so they've been available in that way. The Red Cross has been available at multiple sites and has done some really good work for people. There have been delays, which has been hard because many people haven't had stable shelter.
Right.
But there's nothing that folks around the globe can really do about that for us. And if FEMA decides to move in trailers, we'll have more shelter. Presently, we don't have any of those trailers, and I'm not sure we'll ever get any.
Okay.
The other organizations that have been truly helpful are Samaritan's Purse, for example. They were really essential to so many of us who had our homes destroyed. And what they do is they come in and they will help you dig through your home to find anything that you can, which was great for me because I did find some things that I had thought were lost completely. The coolest thing that I found was a picture that my dad had. He'd gotten it as a youngster from his uncle who was a cheesemaker. Now, my dad lived until he was 90 and he died about 10 years ago. So that picture was nearly 100 years old. And for some reason, I had put the picture underneath one of the sinks in the back of the house. And I had this vague thought, oh, well, if there's ever a fire, maybe the water from the sink will somehow turn on and, it'll be spared. Well, that's exactly what happened. But what was really crazy was that it was also hanging by its handle. And that is and I don't know how that happened. It was like some piece of pipe had twisted around the handle and kept it from falling into the pit. Go figure.
Wow.
So I got the picture and I was dumping out the soot and ashes. And when I realized there was a key with a tag on it and the key said crypt, which is so I was like, oh my gosh, because it was the key to where my mother's ashes are stored. So that was a real twofer. Yeah. So that was a really pleasant surprise. So those organizations have been tremendously helpful. Also, the Phoenix Grange has been reaching out to people. We're providing a soup weekend experience for anybody who's hungry, and some really good soups, by the way. So, the Phoenix Grange has been marvelous. The Elks, when they call themselves the Benevolent Protective Order of Elks, they're not kidding, because when there's an emergency, they really step up to the plate. And I'm sure there have been some other organizations that have been equally helpful, but those are the ones that I've mostly been in touch with. If people, around the world are listening to this and want to be helpful, I would say that the way to do that would be to examine your fire preparedness in your city, to take a look at what our current farming practices, how our current farming practices are influencing climate change, and to have a go bag prepared with the things that you really want. because in my case, I couldn't go back to my home. It was burning already.
Right.
I couldn't take a lot of things that I would have liked to have had, but give it some serious thought because, it could happen in your area, I'm sorry to say. I think the more as a globe and as a nation we can come together and determine how we're going to address climate change, the better off we'll be. So all of those grassroots organizations out there, they're essential to creating one coherent voice. And that's what I hope will happen.
Sharon, thank you so much. I know this is a very difficult time, but I'm sure in many ways it also causes deep reflection and you realize the things that really do matter. I'm very glad your family picture survived and you have that token of your long family history. And I hope your community gets a chance to rebuild in the way that you want.
Thank you. I hope so too, Kristen. Thanks so much for being for this interview. It's been kind of therapeutic, actually.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. And I'm going to ask you one slightly silly question because I ask everybody, and I kind of want to end on a lighthearted note, but I ask everybody if they had to pick a pollinator representative to represent them online as an avatar, what pollinator would you pick?
Oh, I think that's pretty straightforward for me. I'd pick the honeybee.
All right. Well, we hope you and your organization keep buzzing. I'm very glad some of your colonies made it through. And I hope that ends up being a sign that despite everything, we will keep foraging and keep flying.
Thank you.
So my very best to you.
Thank you so much, Kristen.
Wow, that was a really touching story, Kirsten. Thanks for bringing it to us and our listeners.
Oh, most welcome. I was so pleased that Sharon made herself available. I mean, those are difficult situations, and I can't imagine being in her shoes.
Before we started this, we were talking about the weird weather, and my weather is weird, and what she's going through is no doubt at least partly due to the weather, that the climate, whatever is going on in the world, kind of scary, I think.
Yeah, I've spoken with scientists, and I think we're going to find more and more fire events in our Northwest, just because of the way when rains happen, they happen in large quantities, but then there's long time spans without it. So we should all prepare and have, as she said, plans already laid for what we do in such a situation.
Yeah, in the Pacific Northwest, when we moved here, everyone said, well, have a go bag ready for earthquakes.
Oh.
And now you have to start thinking about, fire too. Wow.
Well, I'm going to stay here in the Midwest, Jeff. We don't have fires and we don't have earthquakes. We just have 70 degree weather in November. So I'll stay with that.
Do you guys ever get tornadoes where you are?
Yeah, we do once in a while. But not often enough that I'm gonna move.
Well, that's good. So I lived in Maryland, and we don't often get tornadoes, but a friend of mine lost her barn. The bees actually survived. She lost all 7 of her outbuildings. The 5 colonies that were up next to the tobacco barn survived. And then a few years later, she had another one come through just up the street from her. So you don't normally think of Maryland as a tornado alley, but boy, in that part of Maryland, they were sure coming through.
Wow.
All right, that about wraps it up on this podcast. Before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, wherever you download and stream the show. Your vote helps other beekeepers find us quicker. Even better, write a review and let other beekeepers looking for a new podcast know what you like about us. As always, we thank Bee Culture, the magazine for American beekeeping, for their continued support of the Beekeeping Today podcast. We want to thank our regular episode sponsor, Global Patties. Check them out at www.globalpatties.com. We want to thank Strong Microbials for becoming the latest supporter of the podcast. Check out their probiotic line at www.strongmicrobials.com. And finally, we want to thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener, for joining us on this show. Feel free to send us questions and comments at questions@beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Anything else we want to mention? Kirsten, Kim?
I think that does it, Jeff.
All right, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.